What's up, everybody? This is Alex Christoforou with the Duran, and I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran, and today we're going to be taking a look at Act VIII of the Yellow Vest protests in Paris. All right, Alexander, we've got more news coming out of France, and it amazes me sometimes some of the things that Macron does. And it seems that maybe during the holiday season, Christmas, New Year's, maybe people thought the whole Yellow Vest protest would die down a little and fizzle out. But Macron, in his infinite wisdom, decided to arrest Eric Drouet. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Eric Drouet.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Who is? I mean, the Yellow Vest doesn't have a leader per se, but he has emerged as one of the de facto leaders of the movement. I believe he's a truck driver from South Paris. The southern suburbs of Paris. And he's emerged as one of the leaders of the movement. And Macron arrested him. And of course, today we had more protests, tear gas, police coming out, all kinds of mayhem and unrest. What's going on? 2019 and the Yellow Vests are still here. What's your take, Alexander?
Well, two things to say. First of all, this arrest was an incredibly misjudged move. Now, you say that Macron ordered it, or rather Macron did it. He will no doubt say that it was done by the French authorities, but the French system, the French political system is very centralized. I am quite sure that he was in the loop on the decision. And if you listen to the kind of things he's been saying about the Yellow Vests, they have been so lacking in contrition and so aggressive that it is incredibly provocative towards the Yellow Vests. And I am sure that even if no words were spoken between Macron and the authorities who arrested him, which, by the way, I think they were, but even if they were not, it is difficult to see how Macron's comments about the Yellow Vests would not have been seen by some people in the French civil service and police bureaucracy as a green light and as an encouragement to carry out this sort of arrest. Macron is handling this situation incredibly badly. He was last year forced to make certain concessions to the Yellow Vests, certain important economic concessions, which did for a time appear to be taking some of the steam out of the protests. Then there was the Christmas holiday, when everybody obviously was more concerned with the Christmas celebrations than they were with going out protesting. If he'd handled this situation a little more intelligently, the likelihood is that people would have come back from their holidays and things would have continued to die down. Instead, by behaving in this way, he has provoked more protests. And though those are nowhere near as big as they were at the peak of the protests a few weeks ago, they are still too large, around 50,000 people supposedly across France. Probably more, actually. They are too many for any government to be really comfortable. So, I mean, again, he has shown why he is simply not the proper person to lead France.
I'm still trying. I mean, I listened to what you said, Alexander, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around why he would do such a thing. Did Macron get bad advice from his advisors? Did he think that, he would be able to kind of, I don't know, in a sneaky way, arrest Drouet, maybe arrest some other people after the holidays and kind of, get away with it and people wouldn't notice? Why would he do this thing? I mean, it just seems so stupid.
Right. The first thing to say is he is a very bad and inexperienced politician. We must never forget that he became president of France very easily and very quickly. He's far the youngest president France has ever had, at least in terms of democratic politics. And I mean, you have to go back to Napoleon to find a leader who rose so fast and so quickly. And of course, Macron is not Napoleon. So he is a very bad politician. But if you follow French media and French news, and you follow the sort of elite neoliberal opinion in France, the sort of people who surround Macron and who he listens to more than he listens to the ordinary people of France in the towns and villages across France. If you look at what this neoliberal opinion has been saying, they have been cranking up with anger against the Yellow Vests. They are very offended by this movement. They are outraged by it and by the fact that it is effectively changing the neoliberal course that France is taking, upon which they are committed. They have to some extent egged Macron on. He plays to that constituency. He is also hugely, I think, personally offended by the Yellow Vests movement, which has shown up the hollowness both of his pretensions and of his political position in France, and as a result, both for misjudged political reasons, because he's listening and looking to the wrong people, and out of injured vanity, he has committed another major misstep.
Okay, now Macron's government did make some concessions to the protesters. Some seem serious, some seem a little hollow, and something that they can walk back. But obviously, it's not stopping the protests from occurring. We're on number 8. We're going to probably go into Act IX of protests. What is it that is driving the people in France onto the streets? What is it that they're looking for from the Macron government? Because it's something more than just, giving them a couple of concessions here and there. They're actually looking for something more. What is it?
Right. Well, can I first of all say, I think what we are now looking at is a real possibility of these protests getting stronger, because the economic situation in France is actually getting worse, as it is across Europe. Stock markets falling around the world and all those things. And, it's very fragile at the moment. The world economy looks very fragile. And, of course, it looks very fragile in France. But what is adding to this is, of course, the mood language that is coming out of the French leadership and of the French government. Here we have Macron basically criticizing the Yellow Vests, calling them xenophobes, implying that they're racists, implying that they're violent, refusing to show that he has any real understanding of their concerns. We have Angela Merkel, who is, of course, the senior partner in the partnership between Macron and Merkel. Now, again, talking about how countries around Europe need to give up their sovereignty, when a large part of what is driving the Yellow Vests protests is a feeling of injured French identity and injured French patriotism. And these economic concessions, which you talked about, they are important in a sense that they show that Macron is getting weaker politically, and they will have made some difference to people in France, some of the people who have been protesting. But they do not change the fundamental economic picture, which is that taxes in France are very high. They are bearing very heavily on the French population. France has the highest tax take of any country in the OECD group. And at a time when the French economy is not doing well and the general economy everywhere is slowing, it is not surprising that this is causing more protests.
And it seems that it's right now you have the ultimate globalist puppet in power in France. Yeah. When the people are screaming, they're out on the streets, and it seems to be they're looking for a leader that is much more nation-state focused. So it just seems that you're not going to be able to reconcile the two. So when's this thing going to come to a head?
Well, I come back to what I've said before. France has a very strong institutional system. A lot of people have been talking about various ways of leveraging Macron out of power before the elections come. Maybe that will happen. As I said, France is the land of protest and indeed of revolution. But I'm afraid there is a greater risk, which is that this thing is going to drag on, that we're going to see escalating protests, more and more strikes, authority draining away from Macron steadily, but him clinging on and the establishment clinging on with him. And we could see a deepening malaise in France carrying on until the next elections, the next presidential elections, which are in several years' time. And I'm afraid that has to be a risk we need to bear in mind, because it's not institutionally or constitutionally simple to find a solution to this. Charles de Gaulle, created the Fifth Republic precisely to insulate it against these kind of protests, because, of course, back in the 1950s, France had been extremely unstable politically. And of course, that stability, that extreme stability, institutional stability, which he created, is now working to insulate a political leader who stands for the diametric opposite of all the things Charles de Gaulle believed in.
Eric Drouet, now legally, do you think he's going to be released? Or do you think they're going to actually hold him for some significant amount of time?
I don't know. But my own personal guess is that they will try and hold him for some time. I think this has become so stubborn. This political system has now become so stubborn that everything suggests to me that rather than releasing him and letting the protests fizzle out, they will double down. And can I just say something? I mean, we've talked about protest leaders in other countries. I've talked about Navalny in Russia. We've talked about Tommy Robinson in England. If you remember how Tommy Robinson was arrested and sent to prison in, frankly, very inappropriate circumstances, that made him a big leader, and he's now become a big figure in Britain, or are a bigger figure in Britain. Navalny is not a big figure in Russia because the Russian authorities are very careful to keep him on a long list. Macron, example of the British, and is probably doubling down. And surprise, surprise, he's, I think, going to become more of a martyr figure and more of a leader, and that could very easily make the protests grow. And on top of all the other things, we could start seeing the yellow vests and more people joining the yellow vests, and it becoming a free Drouet movement.
All right. In 2019, I think it's pretty, at least from what I'm reading, the major consensus is that we are going to probably see an economic slowdown in 2019.
Yes.
And now you have this protest, which is really draining and weighing down the French economy, which in effect weighs down and drains on the EU as a whole, France especially being a central part, a major player in the EU. How is this going to affect the EU and the global economic situation going into 2019?
Right. I think if in terms of the global economic situation, we should not overestimate the importance of France. I mean, France is a big economy. It's one of the key Western economies. If you go back to 2007, the very first indication that there was a major crisis brewing in the financial system in 2007 was when a French bank started to have problems covering its funding. But I think since then, things have moved on, and France is perhaps less important in the global scale of things than it was 10 years ago. So I think we should look at the United States first and foremost. We should look at China. We shouldn't look too much at France. The European Union is different. In the European Union, France is a key country. If France falls further into political and economic crisis at a time when the European Union is already looking very ragged, when there is not really strong leadership in Germany, where leadership in Italy is insurgent, then I think you could see things going very, very much more badly wrong in the European Union. And can I remind you, Alex, I sent you a little while ago an article in Bloomberg which talked about one European economy which is doing very well at the moment, which is, of course, Hungary's economy under the leadership of Orbán. And inevitably, there's going to come a point where people are going to start making those comparisons. They're going to look at the integrationist Macron. They're going to look at the integrationist Merkel. because Germany is slowing too. They're going to say there is a creeping malaise, in fact, a worsening malaise here. The euro currency is obviously not working well. Let us look at the one economy within the EU, rather the one group of economies that is in the EU, which are actually doing quite well. It is that of the Eurosceptic states led by Viktor Orban and Hungary. And I cannot believe that that is not going to have an increasing effect.
Boy, but that must drive the Brussels globalist absolutely crazy to hear that news. I mean, that's just, Orban to be the one leader in this European country that's actually doing well on an economic level. And then to see Germany and France start to falter, it's like their worst nightmare.
It's absolutely their worst nightmare. And of course, if France sinks into deep crisis, then, to be absolutely clear, the EU project is in deep crisis too. It depends on a strong France. It depends on a strong Germany and on a strong France. If those two are strong and they're working together in harness, then the thing can move forward. If it doesn't, the whole thing falls apart.
And you also have an unresolved situation with Italy as well. So, that doesn't factor well for the European Union going into 2019.
Absolutely. Italy is an interesting country because it's got many of the same problems as France has, but it has a government that is starting to look more at what Orban and the other Eurosceptic groups in Eastern Europe are doing. So, as I said, you're seeing more and more tensions, and inevitably there are going to be people in Brussels who are going to start wondering whether the next government in France, when Macron eventually goes, which one day he will, is going to be more like the one in Italy than the one that they currently have with Macron in France. And that is going to really, really be a major crisis for the whole EU project.
All right. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran, thank you very much. Guys, if you like that video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on the notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. And visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt to help support the Duran. In the description box, you will find links to our PayPal and Patreon page. And you will also find links to the audio broadcast of this show on Apple, iTunes, and on SoundCloud. And don't forget to go to the Duran to read the links from the articles that Alexander reads every morning as he's drinking his coffee. Are you drinking coffee, Alexander, in the morning, or tea?
Oh, absolutely. I drink coffee every day. Right. Tea is the afternoon, coffee in the morning.
Great. All right. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, everybody. Until next time, take care.